Welcome to the very first episode of the 2-3 Zone. I am your co-host, Josh, and here with me is my pal, Cameron.
How you doing?
Today we're going to give you hot takes with hotter statistics, and we decided we'd dive into it first with the San Antonio Spurs. Being a San Antonio native, we now sit at the 9th seed with a record of... Oh, what's our record?
Our record is 38-30.
Yeah. This is probably the first time we've seen this for the Spurs in a long time. It's abysmal, really. Do you think we have a chance at making the playoffs standing at the 9th?
We do have a chance at making the playoffs. It's just gonna depend on whether other teams lose more than if we win.
Mm-hmm.
Our dynamic for the year has been going through LaMarcus Aldridge, who was voted an All-Star, and rightfully so. He stepped up in the loss of Kawhi Leonard, which has been a tough loss for us this season, because I feel like we could be probably in the third or maybe even the second seed this year with the way that Kawhi improves every year. We just didn't get to see him improve much this year. I do think there is a chance at us making the playoffs. It's larger than a small chance, but not a large chance. What about you? What do you think?
I agree with the point that we have to count on teams losing rather than us winning. I think that we can't count on the Thunder or the Pelicans losing any more games, especially because now that Anthony Davis is back with the Pelicans. But we're gonna have to put in all our chips for Jimmy Butler really affecting the Timberwolves and the Clippers just not being as good as they say they are. And the thing with Kawhi is that we held on to the 3rd seed for the longest time, and whenever he was gone, people said, "Oh, we don't need Kawhi. This is Greg Popovich." But I think this has really been a true testament that without Kawhi Leonard, we're not the greatest team. I think when Tim Duncan retired, he was passing the torch to Kawhi Leonard, and without him, we don't really have much to go off with. We can have one of the best benches in the NBA, but what's the point if our starters can't score?
And I think this is the first year that Greg Popovich hasn't had a superstar on his team, because ever since Tim Duncan got into the league, he has proven himself to be an all-time great. His demeanor, what he brings to the team, how he brings team chemistry together, what he can do on the court and off the court. And this year, like you said, that was supposed to be Kawhi's job. Timmy was going to pass the torch to Kawhi, who was going to carry us forward. And now he's gone, and now Greg Popovich doesn't have that go-to option to score. I mean, we have LaMarcus Aldridge, who has been doing well in the absence of Kawhi, but he's not Tim Duncan level, Kawhi Leonard level superstar. He is a good complementary star. He realized that was his role, because Greg Popovich said last summer that he tried too hard to make him Tim Duncan, and when he came to this team, that wasn't supposed to be his job. He's supposed to be a second option to Kawhi Leonard, and now that he's found that, he's become a more sound all-around player. So I think it's really interesting to see the dynamic that the Spurs have without having that key player that they go to every game to score. That being LaMarcus Aldridge now has really shaken us up. But I think that there's some good things to come out of this. For instance, the starting of DeJounte Murray. I've been wanting him to start longer than he's been starting, because when we first drafted him, I saw a highlight reel. I didn't really delve too deep into his stats, but what I saw was a 6'5" point guard, athletic, long, able to shoot the ball, a great driver, slasher player, and now that he's going to the starting lineup, he's improved greatly. I think he's taken the spot of Tony Parker pretty well. But then as a result of that, just us moving players around, seeing what we can do, it's kind of taken a toll on the Spurs and what we can do. So I think that we can make the playoffs. It's just a very slim chance. I don't know how far our playoff run will go if we do.
I think we'd probably... I don't think we can... If we sneak in at an 8th seed, there's no way we're going to beat the Rockets or the Warriors.
No, there's too much firepower on each team for us to handle.
But I do like that you brought up DeJounte Murray. I think he can be argued as a steal of the draft, considering the people he's been playing with, or like the people picked before him, and the fact that the Spurs got him 30th. And that's interesting because, when we drafted DeJounte, an oversized point guard that can shoot, I took it as we got like a very uncoordinated Penny Hardaway on our team, with a little more hair, but you know, he's a little shorter than Penny Hardaway, but that's the way he moves and is able to pass. That's how I see him. I'm really glad that we're finally starting him, but I think that they say that we have the hardest record going up ahead, and I think that we just have too many players that are inconsistent to make the playoffs. For example, sadly, DeJounte Murray, only because it's his second year, is very inconsistent, along with our recent pickup of Rudy Gay. What are your thoughts on him?
Rudy Gay, to me, has been a disappointment. Not because he's a bad player, but because of what he... And it might not even be his fault, but whenever I think of Rudy Gay, I think of him as, in his Sacramento days when he was the man.
Or even in the Grizzly days.
Even in the Grizzly days, too. So I think that we kind of got our hopes up, maybe a little bit too much. He is also coming back off an injury, his ACL, and he was out for a while with, I think, his heel. He had a heel injury. So, as soon as we picked him up, I was like, a small forward, that's a really good backup to Kawhi. But then I think my problem was I saw him in place of Kawhi, and you just can't replace him. He's, when healthy, a top 3 player in the league.
He was third in MVP voting.
Third in MVP voting. Just because of what he can do defensively and offensively. To pick up the hardest guy on offense and to have the offensive weight that he has to carry as well, it's a really tough job. And to think that Rudy Gay could just come in and maybe not score the same numbers but similar numbers might have been a little bit hyperbolic.
Do you think we should have started him more, Rudy Gay?
Or would that I think so. Helped? I think we should have started Rudy Gay a little bit more over Kyle Anderson. Yeah, Kyle Anderson's, don't get me wrong, he's a good player.
This is his best year. It's around a little less than 10 points a game, but that's great for Slow-Mo, especially since we picked him up right after the 2014 championship. I'm glad that he's really developing, and I've heard opinions that go both ways of whether or not we should drop him after the season, but I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think Kyle Anderson is a Spur at heart with the way he, his demeanor, the way he acts, unselfish, like Greg Popovich turns all of his players. Before, he was a nobody, and now he's not necessarily a star, but he's made a name for himself in the league. And I think it's kind of a 50-50 toss-up if we want to get rid of him or keep him, because there are...
But I wouldn't sign him to some crazy extension.
No.
Something small.
I'd say something like around...
Because I think he's still developing. We just got to see whether or not he can get a better jumper. Because, he's gotten the name Slow-Mo because his release is so long. But, going back with the Spurs in general, I think, we do, besides the Thunder, have the hardest record going up. And... the one team that I didn't think would be ahead of us in the playoffs would be the Timberwolves, who right now stand at 40-29, and recently it's been outed that Andrew Wiggins is very upset that he's been a third option. However, he's been playing like a third option, so I don't know if this warrants him being upset. He's not a very consistent player, but I'd go a step farther, and I'd ask you, Cameron, would you think Andrew Wiggins is a bust? He's a great player. He's 16, 17 points a game. Pull up his stats real quick. But he doesn't play like a first overall draft pick. If you compare him to people like Karl Anthony Towns or even Ben Simmons, who just missed the All-Star game by like one vote or whatever, and Karl Anthony Towns, who's already made the All-Star game, and the people in Wiggins' draft, Joel Embiid, who has already made the All-Star game and is putting up 22 points a game and is even a considered player for MVP this year. What would you say about Wiggins?
It's hard to say that he's a bust because he's surrounded by a lot of talent. Karl Anthony Towns, first overall pick, Jimmy Butler, a solidified All-Star. To say that he's a bust in that system is an interesting take, because what if he's on a team like the Lakers or
that's true.
A lower team like the Nuggets or the Kings or the Suns? I think he could be putting up higher numbers. He'd just be on a worse team. The fact that they have those two players, Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns, those take away from his how many touches he gets a game, how often he's able to shoot the ball. Because his stats last year, he was averaging around 23.6 points a game, and the year before that, around 21 points. And that was when they didn't have Jimmy Butler. That was when they didn't have this one person who's like averaging somewhere. His career average is somewhere around like he's like a 25 and 3 guy. So just taking the ball out of Wiggins' hands is tough because he's a scorer. He's not a passer. He's not a shooter, but he's a scorer. So when you take the ball out of his hands, it would make sense with those other two options that he would perform a little bit worse because he is more efficient with the ball in his hands as opposed to off.
Okay. But he hasn't, in the recent games without Jimmy Butler with his torn meniscus, he hasn't necessarily stepped up. It doesn't show it here in the stats that we have. This is just for this year. However, in those last 8 or 9 games without Jimmy Butler, he's only been putting up around 15 a game. You brought up the lack of touches. However, he's been getting more touches. However, it's not him that's been making the buckets because he doesn't have the touches. It's Karl Anthony Towns, the player that's been in the league less than Wiggins, that has chosen to step up. What would you have to say about that?
I'd have to say that the way... Well, Tom Thibodeau is their coach, right? Mm-hmm. Very defensive-minded coach. Andrew Wiggins is... I wouldn't call him an elite defender. He's an okay defender.
Oh, not even Towns is that great of a defender if you really look at it. There's many times I've seen, going back on replays where Andrew Wiggins is beat to the spot or he's been playing lazy defense and it leads to an open shooter. But I like that you brought up Tom Thibodeau with their defense because I don't know where they're ranked at defense, and especially since now they've been, dubbed the Minnesota Timberwolves, which the 09 or 011, not 011, the 09 or 11 Bulls were known for great defense. Do you think that defense makes up for their poor offense they've been having lately?
I think that the way Tom Thibodeau uses his players, like we saw with Derrick Rose was used immensely, and that some Bulls fans might say that would have led to what were his injuries in the past couple last couple of years.
Yeah, playing him when you didn't need him.
Playing him when you didn't need to. I think that when Tom Thibodeau plays his stars, he might wear him out a little bit. And I think that could be what Wiggins is experiencing right now. A young player, not used to playing under a system where he's asked to do this much. That might have to do with why he is averaging, around 18 points as opposed to 24 or 21.
Yeah, I think that, the Thibodeau effect, or I think that's what it could be called or dubbed, with Derrick Rose, becoming victim of that. But if we were to look at, Karl Anthony Towns, who's been having a great year, I'd say he's a very, very small contender. I'd say he's about 20th place, but he's a contender for MVP. And if we were to go to the MVP race in general, it's pretty tight this year. But I'd say tight with the exception of James Harden. I think James Harden locked up that award when he had the 60-point triple-double, and when he went on an 18-game win streak and led the Rockets past the Warriors. However, if we were to take that away, take away James Harden from this race, you have Kevin Durant, LeBron James, DeMar DeRozan, Anthony Davis, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, last but certainly not least, Damian Lillard, who's been argued to be slept on in that race. What are your thoughts on, this MVP race with the exception of Harden?
With the exception of Harden, I'd say my MVP for the year is probably Anthony Davis. With the way that he's been playing recently, putting up 30, he'll give you 30 and 15 a night, and this isn't against weak teams either. The way that he's flipped around the Pelicans franchise, even with the loss of DeMarcus Cousins, terrible loss in the beginning of the year. They should be much higher than they are right now. I think they could have secured, the 3rd seed, maybe not the 2nd seed, and beat Golden State, because Golden State and Houston are untouchable right now. Mm-hmm. But I think that with the way that Davis has been playing, with the lack of his superstar partner, putting up the numbers that he is, with the team that he has, at the beginning of the year, who were the New Orleans Pelicans? We were going to say, okay, they have Davis, they have Cousins, but who's around them? nobody. When you have a team of nobodies around you, I mean, with the exception of Drew Holiday.
Mhm.
Drew Holiday has actually been pretty good this year.
He's been stepping up.
Averaging around
Ever
20
since
points
he was
a game.
traded from Philadelphia to New Orleans.
Averaging around 20 points a game. He's a star, but he's not like
An
an
underrated
all-star.
star. Yeah.
He's not an all-star. He's no superstar like DeMarcus is. But with the way that he's been playing and the expectations for the Pelicans were kind of low because every year we talk about how good Anthony Davis is, but he's never in the MVP race seriously. I mean, last year it was obviously a race between Westbrook and Harden. The year before that, Steph Curry, unanimous MVP. Before that, Steph Curry again. Steph Curry race with Harden. But I think this year has been his year, even though teams like Golden State and Houston have been outshining him because of the way that those powerhouse franchises have been playing this year. I'd have him as my MVP pick. What would you say?
Yeah, the fact that your starting center is Emeka Okafor, a 33-year-old retired player that's been out of the league for 4 years, and your best player is dropping 33 and 15 on your favorite team, that really says something. I'd have Anthony Davis as the MVP. The fact that he can step up without DeMarcus Cousins. They made some trades for Nikola Mirotic from the Bulls or whatever, which is a small help from the bench. But you still have guys like Etuan Moore and Ian Clark. I can name off the top of my head right now. But yeah, I would give a considerable mention to Damian Lillard, who's been on this streak of like 35 point, 10 rebounds, even triple doubles that he's been putting up. I think that's, I think it makes it close. But the fact that he still has his his buddy, his sidekick C.J. McCollum, and Yusuf Nurkic, who's been very underrated to clean up the mess for them. I think that very much helps Lillard, and it's the fact that Anthony Davis doesn't have that. Yes, Drew Holiday's a star, not an all-star, but he's there. He's good. But the fact that you just have Drew Holiday and Emeka Okafor to save you. But I don't know. Yeah, I'd say Anthony Davis as well. But this would be the first time in I don't know how long that the Hornets, not the Hornets, the Pelicans have made the playoffs. And them making the playoffs, considering that they got Buddy Hield a year or two ago. That brings us to the question of the draft, because now this draft is as stacked as we had last year, with lots of talent, international and national. And we pulled up this mock draft, and with the teams that have been tanking. And if we would just divert from the draft for a little bit, I brought it up with Cameron a few minutes ago before the podcast, that this has been a kind of tankapalooza for the NBA. If we go back to the standings, 11 of the teams in the NBA right now are tanking. You have the Memphis Grizzlies, you have the Phoenix Suns, the Sacramento Kings, the Dallas Mavericks, maybe the Lakers, but that's pushing it. But on the Eastern Conference, it's wild. The Hawks, the Magic, the Nets, the Bulls, the Knicks, and the Hornets are all tanking, trying to get a top pick in the draft, which is making it very easy for teams like the Pistons or even the Heat, who almost have a losing or a 50-50 record. It's easy for them to make the playoffs. I think this kind of thing really hurts the NBA, that you have so many teams trying to lose on purpose because it's going to hurt the amount of money and viewers they have. And I don't think this can be something that the NBA can allow. What are your thoughts?
I think what the NBA did with Mark Cuban was really good. They fined him about $500,000 for admitting that the Mavericks were taking. I mean, it's kind of disrespectful to your fans and your fan base in the city in which you host these games for the people to go and see, if in their mind they're thinking we're losing on purpose. From a fan's perspective, you go into a game of basketball hoping for your team to come out with the dub. There's no, maybe if you're a super diehard fan, you would want the team that you're rooting for to lose because you want a high draft pick, but the casual fan wants to go into a basketball game and expect their team to win. And if they're not going to get that, that kind of takes away the whole fun of watching the game, being a part of it as a fan. So I think that with NBA teams, like 1/3 of the league is tanking right now. They would lose revenue. They would lose viewership. I mean, pretty much the only games that you want to see are on national TV.
Yeah, that's the only good games. You have the Wizards against the Cavaliers, or even the Rockets against the Warriors. There's no point in watching a game against the Magic and the Hawks, who are tied for the 15th spot at 20-48. Purposely losing. No point.
It's a real shame that we have teams that have the mindset of going out and losing games so that they could be better in the future. I think the only team that's ever had a future build that has really worked for them, like in this season, has to be the Boston Celtics.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't necessarily tanking on purpose, but with the young assets that they've acquired, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, he's only 19, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
Oh my god.
He's
I've
only
heard
19.
that too many times that Tatum is 19.
Yeah, you know he got rejected from going into a liquor store because he's only 19. He's only 19.
Forget that he's only 19.
I can't forget that
Not
he's
even
only
20. Can't
Boston
even
fans won't let me forget that he's only 19. But with the way that they've done it, they've acquired all, and it had to do with the Nets trade, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Oh, of course.
Possibly one of the worst trades in NBA history, if not the worst. Would you say?
I'd say it was the worst trade in history, but I think that tanking has been too successful because, if we look back at the Spurs, we tanked for one season with Dominique Wilkins as our starting small forward
That was
in
crazy.
'97. One season, and we got Tim Duncan. I think too many teams are looking at that example, or even the Boston example, and are saying, hey, we can do that too. But the problem is, you're not getting Tim Duncans anymore.
No.
You're getting Luka Doncic and Trae Youngs. People that, by God, you shouldn't compare to Tim Duncan. And if we go back to the mock draft, if we assume that the Memphis Grizzlies get the first overall pick, they're probably going to get DeAndre Ayton. And I think this is... I don't like the tanking, but I think that these players are good for the league because I read, somewhere in SportsCenter that they're comparing them to unicorns, kind of like Kristaps.
Yeah.
These versatile, athletic players that can really help the league and play all kinds of positions. But if we were to go down the list, we have Phoenix getting the second pick with Luka Doncic. Atlanta, being as terrible as they are, getting Marvin Bagley, and Orlando getting Jaren Jackson. Sacramento getting Mohamed Bamba from UT. Hook 'em. Cleveland Cavaliers, this is the interesting one where I'd probably stop at. Or maybe, no, I'll go to 7. Cleveland Cavaliers would stop and get not Trae Young, Michael Porter Jr., with the Brooklyn pick. Which is interesting because, having a broken back and deciding to draft him would be strange for Cleveland, considering that they passed on Joel Embiid because of his injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Dallas would get Trae Young, but I don't see Trae Young having as big an impact in the NBA.
Mm-hmm. And I really think that the Cleveland getting Michael Porter Jr. is huge because of, this year LeBron's a free agent.
Yes.
You've seen his free agent list. He said the Lakers are on his list, the Rockets, the Sixers, or
Maybe the Spurs.
The Spurs?
Maybe.
I think that he would thrive under the Spurs system. But sadly, officially,
Can't
that's
afford
not on his free agent list. What do you think about LeBron James and the future of the Cleveland Cavaliers?
I think that regardless of whether LeBron stays or goes, the Cavaliers organization is doomed, and I think they've been doomed ever since the owner fired their GM that they had before, who was buddy-buddy with LeBron. And it wasn't just that he was buddy-buddy with LeBron. It was because that he was a good GM and he knew what he was doing. If the Cleveland Cavaliers keep LeBron James, that means they also have to keep the contracts for J.R. Smith and Tristan Thompson, along with the contracts for Jordan Clarkson and Larry Nance Jr., which, with the amount of money that LeBron James might ask for, puts them about $20 million over the cap space, over the salary cap and all that. So somebody is going to lose a lot of money. And if he doesn't decide to stay with the Cleveland Cavaliers and he leaves, not only does the next team have to worry about the money problems, which is something that I think that Los Angeles would be able to handle fine. I think that he would fit with Los Angeles the best with his personality. But I think that if he leaves, then, the rest of Cleveland is on cleanup duty, and they themselves are going to have to try and tank, with their best players being Rodney Hood or an aged George Hill. Regardless, Cleveland's future is not as bright as San Antonio's.
And I think what's important to talk about is the trade for Kyrie Irving.
Mm-hmm.
In the trade for Kyrie Irving,
It didn't work out.
It didn't work out at all because they thought they were getting this talent Isaiah Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
who definitely balled out in the previous season.
Yeah, 30 points a game for Boston.
Top 5 in MVP voting, 5th
Mm-hmm.
behind, LeBron, Kawhi, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden.
Yeah.
And then I think that they saw that with They looked at it with tunnel vision.
They looked at that with laser accuracy, and they said, just because, they didn't even look at the possibility that maybe he just worked well with, Brad Stevens' isolation ball, and they just said, hey, we can do that too, and let's bring him over here for Kyrie. However, the thing is that Tyronn Lue is not Brad Stevens. You can't create an offense like that with the way he works. The importance of the coach is really relevant here, because without Brad Stevens, Isaiah Thomas is not as good as he says he is. Yes, he has a hip injury, but a lot of his shots were just, poor shot selection. It wasn't just straight up misses that he had to endure. And I think that Cleveland really banked on him, to not be a ball hog as much and just give some time to LeBron. And I think that costed them greatly.
He's a very ball dominant player, and I think that with LeBron James on your team, you can't be a very ball-dominant player. When you have top 3 NBA all-time player on your roster, then you have to defer to him. You can't come into the Cavs system with LeBron James thinking that I can dribble the ball all I want, I can shoot whatever shots I can, because I had 1 year where I averaged 30 points a game, top 5 in MVP voting, we got the first seed.
Yeah.
I think it went a little bit too much to his head. Little man syndrome.
Napoleon complex.
Yeah, 5'8". You can't be 5'8" and expect him to play any defense.
You can't be 5'8" and expect him to be Kyrie Irving.
The average NBA point guard is 6'2.5".
Yeah.
That is so much taller than he is.
God already hates him.
I know. He's been tossed around the league these past couple of months.
The journeyman.
I know. And with the Lakers, I don't want to say it's a good fit, because they already have Lonzo, mm-hmm. who is there, as Magic Johnson, has made very clear. He's their number one option,
mm-hmm.
almost untouchable in trade deals. And when you come into a system, again, where you have a very ball-dominant player, like Lonzo Ball, like Magic Johnson wants him to handle the ball, and you come into there being an isolation player, it's hard. He had the perfect situation in Boston. He could be as ball-dominant as he wanted because he was the franchise player. He had players like Marcus Smart, Bradley Beal, Al Horford to drive and kick to, because they were good. They were built for the 3-ball. And I think my point was that they banked on Isaiah Thomas to be the franchise player if LeBron were to leave. I think that there's a slightly less chance that he will leave because of the moves they made at the trade deadline, acquiring young talent like Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr., bringing in a veteran like George Hill, great shooters in Clarkson and Hill, a solid young talent in Larry Nance Jr.
Yeah.
But I do think that LeBron is going to leave in free agency, and his top destination, for me at least, should be either San Antonio or Philadelphia.
And with that, I'd like to conclude the very first episode of the 2-3 Zone. Thank you all for listening, and we wish that you would tune into the next episode. Thank you.